friends. Welcome to episode 99 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 14th year, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, by my interview guests, and by listeners who contact the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to Mary in Arizona, Cynthia and Kelly in Michigan, and Holly in Vancouver, and all left-handed school librarians who are listening right now, because you and I have something in common which really does, on some level, set us apart from the rest of the world. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback, questions, and episode suggestions either on Facebook, Twitter, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I will be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And now for today's episode, Students' Right to Read, and my interview with Rachel Monk. Friends, I am so excited to be talking today to Rachel Monk. Rachel, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Before we jump into today's topic, I would love for you to describe your library under what we'll describe as, air quotes, typical circumstances. Could you share with us a little bit about your library when we're not experiencing a pandemic?
Yes, I am a second-year school librarian in a rural county school in Indiana. I oversee the high school library full-time, and I also oversee the library aides at 4 elementary schools. There's also a middle school in our district, and I do not oversee that at this time, but there is a certified librarian there. She is of retiring age, however, so that school will also become under my jurisdiction, so to speak, as well.
Wow. Now, am I to understand that you'll be absorbing that as part of your responsibilities to oversee, or will there be another school librarian being hired to take on the middle school responsibilities?
From what I've heard right now, I believe there will be a library assistant placed at the middle school, so I will take on ordering and helping with lesson plans and guiding that library aide in that role.
Oh, congratulations. You're now a district librarian.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's an episode that's in the works as well, friends. And I think that really does change the impact that you have on your district when you are the one in charge and working with individuals who are working on your behalf. So I'm excited to explore that topic, to be continued. So, during a pandemic, which we're currently experiencing, could you tell me, how has your day taken shape? What do you find yourselves doing now that you are working in a pandemic situation?
I find it's mostly the same. I find that I do a lot more cleaning. I have to quarantine books on a regular basis and wipe down tables. I also keep track of student usage of desktop computers in our makerspace. So I'm tracking names and dates and times. That's a little intensive, but it's worth it for me to keep our students and staff as safe as possible. And unfortunately, we have a independent learning time every other day. We're on a block schedule. I have to limit the number of students who can visit. And that I don't like doing, but again, it's for everyone's safety.
Have you noticed that, explaining quarantine to the kids is hard? Because my students will come through, we do a hallway checkout, and they do what they would do in a face-to-face situation. Well, I want his book, Mrs. Herman. Mrs. Herman, I get that book next. My friend is done with this book, so I get to check it out right now, right? And I'm like, oh, dude, I'm sorry.
Luckily, I haven't run into that situation too much. I'm lucky there.
Can I ask, the motivation for this episode, Students' Right to Read, came from a rather unsettling series of events which you personally witnessed in, I assume this would be your high school library. Am I correct? Okay.
Correct.
Would you, for the benefit of everyone tuning in today, explain what happened? Because, friends, I think some of you are going to listen and say, I know exactly what that looks like, or I've seen something like that before. And it is the reason why I think this is a conversation I think so many of us are excited to be hearing you share today. So what happened?
Well, this topic really started firing in my brain when I witnessed a group of boys brought in during English class to check out books. And they were mocking several sets of books in the library. For example, LGBTQ books, there's a specific section labeled that. They found books on Alcoholics Anonymous, the handbook, and other books on child abuse, relationship abuse. And I went to talk to these boys to find out what was going on, and I help them find a book to read and be productive in our time in the library. And I asked why they thought these books were funny, and they deflected, saying they weren't. Then they specifically asked for books on the KKK to check out. And they had told me that a friend had previously checked it out last year and wanted to see it too. And I showed them a couple books on the topic. And then when we walked to the circulation desk together, it felt like a big joke to them and more of a way to show off to their friends. That was a bit concerning to me. I don't want to discourage any student from checking out a book or choosing what they want to read and the topic that interests them. That is amazing. I just wanted to find the best way to address sensitive topics and why they're in the library. And I didn't want to shame those boys for checking out the books, but impress upon them the importance of these books representing history and other people's lives. And it's not there for them to mock.
Here's the question. Not that this matters, but were the boys surprised you witnessed what you did? Were they hoping you saw it, or do you think they were trying to impress their friends and you happened to be sort of omnipresent and you sort of sensed that there was some nefarious doings over in the corner and you caught them? So I guess I'm curious, were they trying to show off to one another, or were they trying to push your buttons?
A bit of both, I think. I know they had also asked the English teacher about those the KKK books as well. So I think they were trying to push buttons, and they followed through with checking out the books, and I hope they read them and learned something from them. But I felt, judging from their attitude and behavior, it felt more like a way to push buttons.
Okay. Well, and I think all of us can, regardless of the age of our students that we serve, I think we've all found those sort of circumstances where kids have, but it hasn't been intended to be cruel. I think that when students that I have sort of intercepted have done things, it's usually been to get a laugh and not at somebody's expense. I'll give the example, say at the elementary school, is obviously we have human body books in the 612s. And so if you can open up enough human body books, you might find one that is a little more descriptive and a little more, the visuals are a little more explicit in some of the books, and they get very excited. Or my DK Renaissance, which has the full frontal of Michelangelo's David. That's hardly a scandal, But I also don't think the children are doing it out of malice.
I would definitely agree with that. I don't think it was malice towards those people in the books. I definitely think it was a way to show off and to get a laugh. And I understand that need in your group of friends, but there's a time and place, and I felt like those kinds of topics were, I don't know, a little too sensitive to be making fun of. And I don't want that to be a habit for anybody.
Well, and forgive me, but the KKK is historically a very relevant group to have represented in your library, but there are definitely populations of your student body who may find it intimidating to see that material. They may find that it evokes images that are disturbing and very distressing. And so I think that it's not something that you just sweep under the rug, I guess is what I'm saying.
I agree. It's different. Students are going to react in different ways to these topics. And that is definitely something I hope I stressed in the lesson that I taught, was to understand that. Well,
and you also mentioned the LGBTQ students. And you have materials in your library because our libraries are safe spaces for our students, and we need to develop collections which support all of our students and friends. There are episodes on this if you want to scroll back through about our supporting our LGBTQ plus students with our collections and the programming that we promote in our spaces. But, if students choose to mock those books, there's a possibility that somebody watching is noticing that and feeling very targeted. I don't mean to be like creating problems where maybe there weren't any, but, I think especially in school, there are a lot of kids who are questioning, and a lot of kids who probably don't announce to the world that they're probably in a space of something of fluidity or exploring. And maybe those are books that they would want to be able to check out. And the fact that you have boys who are pointing fingers and laughing would make it hard for them to go over and then choose those books.
I agree. And in my research, I came across the term microaggressions and how they impact the people who are mocking and setting those mindsets against those others that they might view as others, but also for those people who do see those aggressions, and that it doesn't have to be outright hate. It's the disrespect. It's the intimidation.
Well, and perhaps we recognize that many of our students are a reflection of their parents, and behaviors which would be acceptable and attitudes which have been expressed in the house would sometimes find themselves transferred into the school. And so attitudes and things which might be, part of the home culture would definitely not be appropriate being expressed in public spaces. And as the adult in the room, your job isn't to sort of ignore or, oh, boys will be boys, or I'm sure they were just being funny, haha, because they're making fun of somebody. And that person might be in the room. They just don't know. And, especially when kids are feeling vulnerable, there isn't always an identifier, a big neon sign that says, hey, guess what? I'm coming out and I'm in a place that I'm sort of vulnerable right now. So I applaud your courage, because all too often when kids are being, I don't want to use the word troublesome, because that somehow diminishes what is going on, but it takes, for adults to step in and say, actually, you guys, that's not cool. And yet I think we owe it to not just our students, but also to the space that we have cultivated. Our library space has to be this place where kids can feel safe. decided right then and there, I need to address this. And friends, the show notes in this episode are fantastic and a great opportunity to do a deep dive. Rachel has shared with us the lesson that sprung out of this series of events. Can you tell me what grade level you targeted initially?
I focused on those English classes that were under that teacher, and that included freshman English classes and sophomores. So I believe I taught 6 or 7 different sections. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact amount, but it was quite a bit of students, yes.
But this is where we can have the greatest impact, right? Because it would be all well and good, if one person decided to seize upon this teachable moment, and that'd be fantastic. The difference is when the school librarian seizes upon the teachable moment, all of a sudden we have an opportunity to impress upon an entire grade of students issues which should not be, sort of neglected. And can I ask, did you at all share with the teacher when you were teaching this lesson why this came up particularly? I guess I'm curious, what did that conversation look like?
I emailed the teacher after that class, and I expressed my concern about the behavior, and I asked if I could talk to the class the next time they came in and explained, my reasoning, and she was very on board with me. And I also talked to the counselor in the school as well to get her opinion on the best way to approach this topic. So I really tried to do my due diligence and making sure I wasn't going to single out any students, but also to impress the seriousness of the topic.
Well, and as the school librarian, and because this behavior took place in the library, you can be sure that this similar type of behavior might take place anywhere else in the school, and surely in kids' basements or, in family rooms. And I really think that calling attention to something that you've encountered and really making sure that kids understand under no uncertain terms that this type of behavior isn't appropriate. I know, I'll share that one of my sons who's in a college dorm, is rooming with, he roomed blind, and he roomed with a student who came from outside the state, and they didn't know each other ahead of time, and realized very quickly, early on, that when this roommate of my son's played video games, that his favorite go-to was to yell homophobic slurs. And it was horrible. I mean, just, when kids have headphones on and they forget that there are other people in the room and they start, shouting at one another when they're playing these video games. And my son was very upset, and he called his brother right away, and his brother called me. And it's very difficult because when kids get away with doing things that really are inappropriate, if nobody says, dude, that's not how we behave. You're offending people. You don't even know you're offending people. So I think that it's a difficult decision to step up and say, yep, this is actually something I can make a change. I can impress upon these students that when this kind of behavior happens, it doesn't matter if it's in your home or if it's in the library or it's at the grocery store, it's inappropriate. So I applaud your courage. Before you began your lesson, you had your students reflect on the following question. Quote, why do you think it's important to have books on topics that you might find controversial or offensive on the library shelves? End quote. And I'd love to know if you could possibly share with us what was some of the feedback that you got from your students? Because I imagine that if you had asked the kids to simply raise their hand, that you might have gotten some different feedback, because that's a hard thing to do, to raise your hand and talk out loud. But if you ask them, I think it was smart to ask them to write these things down, because then they could feel a little more, thoughtful in their response.
It was very eye-opening to read their responses, and I jotted down a few of my favorites. Generally, a majority of them agreed that it was to see other points of views and to learn more about what's going on in the world, or to form their own opinions and find facts. There was one that said spark conversation and learn from others, which I really enjoyed, and help see what you don't agree with, which really, that warmed my heart. Someone said to learn more about others' religions, like the Quran. It's someone's religion should not be offensive, and that surprised me to read that, but I was very happy to see that. There was one that said it wasn't important, and yeah, I could see their opinion, but I don't agree. Somebody also said, what was it? Daddy Donald said so. So that was more of a way to get a rise out of whoever read this.
Yes. And, I think that, again, give the kids an opportunity to say something in a place that, I'm sorry, is rather safe. I don't know if you grade your students on the activities that they do. So I think they sense that, again, this was an opportunity where they could be frank. And unfortunately, I think when you involve politics in the response, I think somebody is definitely reflecting the culture at home, conversations at home. I know that my littles tend to be, they just are echo experts. They just will echo whatever it is they hear at home. And it's not hard to figure out the homes that they're being raised in. So I think that's really eye-opening when you hear that. So nobody came out just and said, I don't think you should have these books on the shelves.
No, I was, just that it wasn't important. There was that one response, but nobody else really said anything against it, which was very encouraging. And I liked all the different types of responses I got, because I got to see their perspective and what they thought. And that I really enjoyed. Sure.
I would be more curious to poll their parents and see what they have to say about your collection, because clearly, the kids appreciate when you do have edgier topics in your library, and that's a theme that's going to come up in future episodes. And they love to be able to learn in a place that is safe. And so, I don't think you're going to get many complaints from the kids, but I would be curious to know what kind of complaints you get from parents. You included ALA's Bill of Rights in your lesson when you presented this to the students. Did you go through each of the ALA Bill of Rights, or did you highlight certain ones to focus on?
I didn't go through each article. I wanted to give the students a general idea of a librarian's responsibility when it comes to our students and what my role is. They don't really have any idea of what I do as a librarian, and I wanted to give them a better idea. I used the Bill of Rights as a general basis of the principles that guide my job, and how that these 7 principles allow the students' right to read to exist.
Friends, Rachel has kindly attached a list of books that you use in an activity in our show notes. Can you explain for us when you asked your students to sort through banned and challenged books? Because I have to think that this was a very memorable lesson for your students in the library.
I even heard several students talking about it in the hallway those couple of days, which was very exciting to overhear. My hope was to get their eyes open and to step out of their shoes for a few minutes. I had them get into groups, and they were each assigned a book. And this book had either been banned or challenged before, and by different groups of people for all sorts of reasons. And the students may not agree that the book was controversial, but someone did. and they tried to censor it. And as a librarian, I can't allow my opinion or anyone else's to limit access to a book that another student or teacher might want. And I wanted them to give their best guess on why they thought it had been banned or challenged, if they thought that it was legitimate or if they were surprised. I really wanted it to come full circle for the students who were poking fun at the different groups of books on the shelves. These books were there to help students make informed opinions of their own on a wide variety of topics. And it comes back to what they learn at home. I really want them to do their own research and figure out what they believe and give them access and the tools to do that. So,
wow. I'm really curious because I imagine some of these books they haven't read yet. So did you eventually tell them why each book was challenged and or banned?
Yeah, I had them discuss it as a group, tell the group why they thought it was banned, and then I would come around and tell them the real reason. And there were some that they were pretty incredulous on, especially when it came to Harry Potter. I had a student who was downright shocked when he heard that it was a controversial book. He was kind of upset. I felt bad.
Yeah, it's like when I tell my students that Captain Underpants is singularly the most challenged book that we have. So Harry Potter, Captain Underpants those are generally two biggies. And then some that fly under the radar. I've never had an issue with my Maurice Sendax in the Night Kitchen. And it's a little boy and he flies through the kitchen and he's bare bottomed, or he's it's just an illustration of a child flying sort of somewhat naked into the kitchen. And apparently somebody found this to be corrupting and they had to challenge it. So, it is interesting because I do have books that do get challenged, and sometimes it's for the language in the books. But, I think that I have to guess, once this lesson ended, did everybody want to check those books out?
There were a few that got checked out. I had to reuse the books for several classes in those 2 days, but on the last day I did see several get grabbed, and they were exploring the nonfiction a little more, which made me happy, just to give them exposure to, they stick to the fiction, what they know, and it's happy to see them exploring a bit more. So that I really enjoyed seeing that.
Wonderful. Whenever I see a list of challenged or banned books, I instantly am trying to identify the reason why it's been challenged. And we've included a link to a definitive resource in ALA's Banned and Challenged Book webpage. So, I have to ask, is this somewhere you've gone to do some of your research when it comes to this particular topic?
Yeah, I love ALA's banned book website. It's under the Intellectual Freedom Committee under ALA, and I think they do a very good job, and they create resources every year for Banned Book Week on the books that have been challenged the most that year, overall time. They create posters and infographics and coloring pages and bookmarks. They do a really nice job, and I highly recommend that as a resource for all librarians.
Terrific. Well, and again, this idea of curating resources for all of us to do that deep dive. So I appreciate the show notes today. I want to encourage everyone listening to read the NCTE's Student Right to Read position statement. And Rachel has made sure that we have a link in the show notes. The NCTE, also known as the National Council of Teachers of English, provided the most current version of Students' Right to Read in 2018 as an effort to combat censorship that was happening in the classrooms. They weren't even thinking about, the libraries. They were thinking about units of learning. So I really appreciate that, because when I looked at that, I thought, wow, so much of this is relevant in our space as well.
I agree. And I love that I was able to pull that into my space as well. And that gives me common ground with the English teachers as well. And that we all have, as teachers, a role in fighting for the intellectual freedom of all of our students. So.
Well, and I know in our district, the reconsideration policy is actually for district-wide application, because it applies to student materials and materials that are used with students. And so when I've been involved in a challenge, it was actually not for material that was in the library. It was because an English teacher wanted to teach a book in their classroom. And so the district policy of reconsideration went into effect not because of the library space. I was brought in to consult and to be a voice on the committee, but it was actually an issue that came up in the classroom, not in my library at all. And by the way, it was Maniac McGee. And yes, the family did back down and the teacher still read it aloud, but that particular child was allowed to go someplace else to read while that piece of literature was read aloud to the class. The horror. All right.
I had an interesting case last year where a teacher approached me on her own and asked for advice on The Giver, and if she needed to send a letter home asking for permission. And I was like, I wouldn't really do that. Like, there's no objectionable, I was trying to bring in the intellectual freedom and work with her on that, but it was a touchy subject, and she was trying to get the principal involved too, just to cover herself.
Right. It's another CYA opportunity. I know, friends, we've once described CYA because I know school librarians and English teachers alike want to make sure that when we do things, we have a way to protect and defend not only our decisions, but our jobs. And it really does. The fact is, we have a lot in common with our English teachers when it comes to the literature that is on our shelves and the literature that is taught in their classrooms. I know that we've also always had to sign off on movies that are PG-13, and it's not so much a censorship issue as it is a rating issue. So I was really amused, friends, reading the procedures for text selection, and again, there's so much crossover between being an English teacher and choosing the materials you're going to teach your students, and being a librarian and choosing materials that are going to be showcased on our shelves. The text selection has a committee. Could you imagine having a committee in place to make our book orders?
That would just add another layer of bureaucracy that I couldn't handle. That I cannot imagine. It would be very... No.
Yeah. I am incredibly grateful that if I want somebody's opinion, I'll ask for it. But I don't have to have a committee to compile my purchasing for my collections. That being said, this very same document spells out the process of addressing a challenge and a reconsideration. And it's always good to see these policies in print because, friends, it's an opportunity for you to review the policy you have in place in your school library or your district, and to make sure that these things are readily accessible, because nobody plans to have a book challenge. Nobody plans on that angry email that, provokes families to pursue this with the district. So it's never a bad idea to take a look at what other organizations have in place to make sure that you have something that is solid and, of course, CYA. So, I love that there's this, crossover, because it sounds like when you work with your English teachers, there is some common ground.
Yes, and I actually found an article by Lester Asheim, I believe, and it was called Not censorship, but selection. And I think that where the curriculum selection happens and then our collection development, there is that common ground. And he discusses the fine line between the role of librarians selecting titles for their collections and actually having that come across as censorship, which I found really interesting, that it's more in the intention and then the attitude in which you develop your collection, and that librarians should have the angle of promoting reading and not inhibit it, while censorship has that goal of prohibiting access and aims to control viewpoints. So it's a very interesting article that I recommend as well. And he warns that librarians, and I would imagine teachers, can fall prey to that fear of that anticipated pressure from those outside forces from the community and our parents. And that fear, he warned, that could lead to librarians censoring themselves when they're making those purchases. And I find myself trying to be very conscious myself of what books am I ordering? Like, who do these books reflect? Will these books add to the collection in a way that broadens access to knowledge for my students? Or is it more just the same of what I have? Or is it just reflecting just my opinion? I try to be very conscious of that. And I hope I don't ever cross that line of self-censorship.
Well, and I am curious because obviously not the topic of today's episode, but, it is no small secret that the United States in the last 4 years has become hyper-polarized with the general attitudes when it comes to politics. And, you do this polarization, unfortunately, has made it very incredibly easy to offend anyone who has a different attitude or position that you might have on a particular topic. So I think that, the school librarians owe it to our student body and our school communities to be that neutral place where everything is out and on the table, because everything should be we should be in a place where we can discuss these matters and do so in a way where students feel safe and students feel supported, and they shouldn't have to, especially because, growing up in the households that our students do, they may find themselves in a space where they don't feel safe expressing their opinions openly. So I really do I applaud your efforts again, because I really feel like recognizing that we owe it to our students to give them that. And the fact that you incorporated this into a lesson and had all of your students learning about it, I love that. It is an opportunity that so many students will now have, and they can think more critically about the words they use and about the attitudes they have. And when they come into your library, they know that you're a person who wants everyone to feel respected. Friends, do yourself a favor and be sure that you check out the show notes today provided by Rachel. It was really fantastic. Rachel, I'm so grateful that you were here. Can I ask, will you continue this lesson or build upon it in the future?
I hope to. Not really at this time, unfortunately. I don't get a ton of time teaching at the high school just because of juggling all the different buildings and being a new school librarian. I'm still trying to get my feet on the ground. But I hope to make these collaborations more frequent and to do more topics like this. I find it very helpful to talk about these difficult topics with the students, and I really enjoy doing it and encouraging that critical thinking that is just so important for all of us to have that developed skill.
Well, I'm imagining there are middle school librarians right now just nodding their heads going, nope, we actually need this at the middle school too. We absolutely need to have these conversations with our students, because it starts, kids can be so incredibly cruel and it very deliberate in who they target. And so, I think the sooner we start to address these issues, I know when I'm in my library, and I'm fortunate to have the students in my space, we sort of tend to pounce on those things which really are so contrary to our beliefs as librarians. And I know one for us especially is girl books versus boy books. And so that is a teachable moment. I don't care what I'm doing or how busy I am or when the next class is coming. But if somebody starts talking about girl books and you can't check that out, that you're a girl, that's a boy book. And I'm like, oh, dude, settle in because we got to talk. So friends, again, it's an important conversation because we as the adults in the room owe it to our students. Rachel, it has been an absolute delight. Please become part of our PLN. So many of us want to follow you and see what you are doing with your program. Would you share with us how we can find you on social media?
Yeah, I am on Twitter and Twitter alone. My handle is @LifeSizeLib.
Wonderful. Well, listen, Rachel, it is Friday. It is time to kick back. And here I have you talking about library, and we should all be enjoying our weekend. I hope that you stay safe and stay well, and that you have, going into this holiday season, I hope that you are able to enjoy it.
Thank you. You too.
I am so incredibly fortunate to have been able to share this conversation with Rachel, and more importantly, that we were able to share it with you today. And I strongly encourage all of you to take a deep dive into the issue of a student's right to read and take a look at the wonderful resources which Rachel has been incredibly instrumental in compiling. And friends, I'll tell you, it's such an important topic and one worth considering, because all too often, when we happen to hear things that are expressed in our spaces, we have to recognize that this is a reflection of the space where our students happen to be, and to seize upon opportunities, not shy away from them, but to see an opportunity to do good in our space, and one that will hopefully resonate in our students' lives moving forward. If you found today's episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. The topic of our next episode will be Your Graphic Library and my conversation with Sarah Smith. I hope you will tune in.